about that time. Yeah, you know, get ready for the Car Man Show. Turn on your TVs and your radios. It's time for the Car Man Show. It's about that time. Yeah, you know, get ready for the Car Man Show. Turn on your TVs and your radios. It's time for the Car Man Show. Tired of riding that old car, spending all that cash on breakdown and repairs, burning all that gas. Paying on time, but car got you late. Need a newer car with a lower interest rate. Public transportation, giving you the blues. Call the car man, he'll know what to do. Don't waste no more time, cause now you know, pick up the phone. It's the Car Man Show. Who can? You can. Who can? You can. I can. You can. With who? Car Man. Who can? You can. Who can? You can. I can. You can. With who? Car Man. Who can? You can. Who can? You can. I can. You can. With who? Car Man. Who can? You can. Who can? You can. I can. You can. With who? Car Man.
Hey, welcome to another edition of the Car Man Show podcast. Just want to say thank you to everybody that is tuned in on today. And for all of you that don't know who the Car Man is, I've been in the car business for over 25 years in this business, helping educate the automotive consumer on the ins and outs of purchasing cars. And my goal has always been to help people make smarter buying decisions. I've been doing these shows all over the country, Chicago, Detroit, Vegas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Texas, just to name a few. I've hosted over 2,000 automotive talk radio shows since 1994, and over 1 million people have taken my advice either personally via my website or from one of my long-standing talk shows. So the first thing I want to talk about in the time that we're in right now is about how to keep your car clean. With everybody washing hands more and just being more conscious of your hygiene all the way around. You want to make sure that when you go in and out of when you get out of your car, you want to wash your hands. You want to make sure that anything that may be on your car doesn't carry over into your house. You want to constantly clean your door handles, steering wheel, temperature controls, radio knobs, just all surfaces in the car, and then completely wash your car at least once a week. Just to, you could do it more, but I would say a minimum of once a week. So now during this struggling crisis that we're going in, some banks are working with consumers who have issues, who may have issues as far as making payments. A lot of these banks are giving people 60 days, no payment, and it won't affect your credit. Some are saying to pay what you can, and some are saying they're not repoing cars at this time. Bottom line is, I urge you to call your finance company and find out what type of relief they are offering people during this crisis. Now, one of the things people always ask me when they meet me, they always say, well, hey, what is it that you actually do? And I always tell them I'm a car consultant on all types of purchases. I have over 25 years experience in dealing with a wide variety of car situations. I will help people buy a car the smart way. Now, speaking of the smart way, a lot of people are wondering, all over the country, how are dealerships operating during the coronavirus? And a lot of them some of them are closed. Some of them are actually closed. The ones that are actually open, in some cases, they have abbreviated hours, or some of them are working by appointment. So if you're thinking about going into a dealership to buy a vehicle, then you need to make sure that you find out what the hours are, and more than likely you're going to have to make an appointment to go into that particular establishment. Now, the good thing, if there's any good thing in what's going on now, there are some of the most aggressive promotions from auto manufacturers that I've ever seen, such as zero money down, 0% financing. I've seen 0% financing for as long as 84 months in some cases. No payments for 90 days. And there's even a company that does 6-month payment forgiveness if you lose your job after you purchase your car. And obviously there's a wide variety of hefty rebates that you can use to help you in your situation. So today I want to talk about credit scores and how do banks look at credit scores. Okay, the first thing is most banks score each application based on a tier system. Now, based on what tier you fall in is determined by the things that are on your credit and credit score. Now, the tier system could be A, B, C, D, E, or the tier system could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It varies based on the particular bank, but everything is going to be determined by your credit, what's on your credit, and your credit and the credit score you have. Now, based on the tier you come back at, it'll determine what your interest rate is. So what I mean by that is that if you come back, let's say the tier 1 is the best tier and tier 3 is a so-so tier. Well, if you come back at a tier 1, you're going to get the best interest rate, the best finance terms, all of that. If you come back at a tier 3, you're not going to have the same options that a tier 1 has. And the same thing if you come back at a tier 4 or 5, you're not going to have those same options. So some banks use this to a T. They don't divert from this. So if you don't fit the criteria for tier 1, you're going to go right to tier 2, and that's going to affect your situation. Now, some banks have what we call deal breakers that will be automatic turn downs in some cases. Some banks, for instance, will not loan to anyone that has a credit score under 500. So if your credit score is under 500 with some of the bigger banks, they will not give you a loan. Now, there are banks that specialize in this, but the bigger banks do not, a lot of them don't do credit scores under 500. Some of the things that also are kind of deal breakers with some of these banks, short-term jobs with no, like for instance, you have a short-term job and then your previous job was another short-term job, or the previous job you had was 2 years ago. If you have a short-term job, the only thing that they don't look down on is if you went from industry to industry. But if you had a short-term job, some banks won't do the loan. Here's another deal breaker: recent repossessions or multiple repossessions can be deal breakers. Now, there are banks that will finance somebody that have a repo. Some banks won't touch repos. Some of the banks won't touch recent repos, like if you've had a repo in the last 6 months, because they're basically going to say that, if you weren't able to pay for your vehicle within the last, 6 months, what has changed in your situation? And then with multiple repos, they're going to look at that in some cases and say, well, somebody gave you a second chance and you messed that up. Or in some cases, I've even seen people with 3 repos. So it just, in some cases, those are deal breakers with the banks. Now, when you're talking about credit scores and tiers, good interest rates usually start at about a 630 score and above. So if you have a 630 or above, you more than likely will qualify for a decent interest rate. Now, depending upon what specials they have going on, depending upon what incentives the banks have, it's going to determine what kind of interest rate you have. But whatever tier you come back at is going to determine the type of car that you get and the required down payment. Now, what I mean by the required down payment is that when you're financing a car, sometimes, just to give you an example, a bank, if a vehicle were to cost $20,000, a bank may say, hey, we'll loan you 100% of that. That means that if the vehicle costs 20, they're going to loan you 20. Well, don't forget, you still got tax, license, and the other things that you have to add to the vehicle. So sometimes the bank will say, hey, we won't finance that. Or sometimes they'll say we'll do 100% of the loan to value, which is what the vehicle books out for. If it's a used car, if it's a new car, they're going to look at the invoice of the car, and they're going to say they'll do that plus tax, title, license. Some cases they'll say we will only loan. I've seen loans where, for instance, a person is buying a car for $20,000, and let's say that includes taxes, title, license, and everything, and the bank says, well, we'll only loan 80% loan to value. Well, that 80% loan to value, basically on a $20,000 loan, is going to be about $16,000. It's going to be about $16,000, and so that person would have to come up with $4,000. That's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand, that when a dealership comes back and says you need a required down payment of whatever, the reason why is not necessarily the dealership. It has everything to do with the bank, and the bank is only going to allow only finance a certain amount of money. So sometimes the dealership can reduce the cost of the car a little bit, but in most cases, the bank, in those cases, the bank may be asking for a down payment because they want to see some skin in the game from you. They want to see you put something toward this deal. So again, credit scores fluctuate based on how you make your payments. One of the things I can quickly say is that if you are looking at your credit score, please don't look at the credit scores on a lot of these online companies that provide credit scores for free or credit reports for free, because a lot of those credit scores are always overinflated because they don't use the same scoring model. And so you need to understand that. So the main credit bureau that most people use, the main credit bureaus that most people use are TransUnion and Equifax. Those are the main banks that most places use. So understand what your credit score is with TransUnion and with Equifax, but not don't. You can look at the online companies that provide credit reports, but look at it just to see what's on your credit report. Don't use it as a credit scoring system, because that is not really what they're there for. Even though some of them do have their own credit score, it's not the same credit score that TransUnion and Equifax uses. Now, one of the things that once you kind of get approved for a vehicle, whether you're a 630 or 500 or 800 credit score, you gotta, after you've negotiated the cost of the car, you gotta do the most important thing, and that's sign all your finance documents. Well, one of the things that I found is that most people that have the car buying process down. You understand how to negotiate. You understand what you want to pay. You understand what to say, how to say it, and all of that. But the thing that amazes me is that people understand all of that, but they have no clue what happens in the finance office during the signing of all your loan documents. In the 20 plus years that I've been in the industry, there are a lot of statements that I've heard over the years that let me know that most people don't have a clue of what's going on. I've heard people say something which just amazes me. They'll say, "Hey, the dealership took advantage of me and gave me a higher payment than I wanted. They tricked me. They lied to me," and they'll use all type of words. So the first question I always ask them is, did you see the payment when you signed the contract? And surprisingly, some people say they didn't pay attention to that. Now, the one thing that I learned as a kid is I always know what I'm signing. I just don't sign blindly on anything. But especially if I'm going to buy something, I want to see what my payment is. So that is so important, and it's so many people, and a lot of you that are listening to me may be some of those people, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about, but it's something to make sure you get on top of your business when it comes to buying a vehicle or really buying anything. You want to understand everything that you're signing. So I wanted to talk briefly about the finance contract and what you need to know when it comes to that. First of all, you need to understand when is your due date. You need to understand when is your due date. The reason that is because you don't want to think your due date is, hypothetically January 1st, and your due date, or let's say you think your due date is January 15th and your due date is actually January 1st. Well, some finance companies have it where if you miss your first payment, your deal is automatically a turn down. So you don't want to run the risk of not knowing when your first payment is due. You also want to understand the interest rate that you have, because that's what determines your payment.